Hi guys, it's Kelly Latevola here, and I am thrilled to be guest designing for Simon Says Stamp. Today we're going to be using a bunch of different products from them, a lot of dyes, which is different for me. We're going to be using the Painted Kindness dye, the Uplifting Thoughts stamp set, the Tropical Leaves dye, and the Hydrangea Petals dye. So traditionally, I prefer one layer cards, so I don't use a lot of dyes for building up. I really loved these hydrangea petals and I wanted to use them, but they are a dye, they're not a stamp. So I kind of got around that in a different way. I die cut them from fullback post-it note, the full sticky post-it note, and also the leaves as well. And I did 2 at a time so that way I would have multiples. They're really thin, so the Big Shot didn't have any trouble with that. And then I went ahead and placed them on my card and traced over them with a Copic Safe pen. So this happens to be a EK Success journaling pen, but you could use a Copic Multiliner or a Micron, I think is also Copic Safe, just so I could get them down. I have a love affair with a bold black outline, so I could have done really intricate die cutting and layering so that they would all be flat. I opted not to do that. I thought that this would be a different way to get a little bit more mileage out of my dies and still get the look that I was going for, which was a layer card. So I cut there was 8 of the flowers, and so I did the center and then down to the right and then moved the ones that were on the right up to the left. If you can eyeball it, you don't necessarily have to keep stacking them on top of each other. But for me, having the other flowers masked made it really easy to know where I needed to trace and where not to trace. And then I just moved them back into position wherever I needed them to be when I went to stamp my leaves. The Tropical Leaves die set has a bunch of different styles of leaves. I chose this one because looking at images of hydrangeas, they have really large, broad leaves. So I thought that they would make the most sense for this particular arrangement. I'm going to go ahead and remove all of my dies. Now, I traced it with a 0.25 marker, or I'm sorry, pen, which is a very thin outline. And I wasn't particularly careful about how I was doing the outline, but I'm not worried about it because I'm going to go back over it at the end with a thicker marker pen, you know, a thicker pen. So here I'm just using some Salty Ocean Distress ink to kind of add some color around the edges. My Copic coloring is going to be dark enough to color that over my petals, so I'm not concerned about just going right over the edges. And this is just going to kind of highlight the image while adding a little bit of color to the background. If you wanted to use a stencil, you could have left all those masks in place and used a stencil and put distress ink over it. Or if you didn't want to get any color on them, you could have left those masks in place and done the same thing. Not really sure why I can't talk today. Masks is apparently a hard word. Anyway, when I was Googling, I noticed in a lot of the images that the centers of these flowers were light blue. So I opted to color the centers light blue before I went in and did any other Copic coloring. I usually have 4 colors. That's just what I feel like gives me a good blend. And I like to leave my highlight in the center. So I already had that light blue down from coloring all of them. So I just added a little bit of the same light blue to the edges. And now I'm going to go through each individual marker and add some to the center and some to the outside, using a really light hand and soft flicking strokes. And this is going to get lots of texture on that one little petal, and it's also going to help them to look really rounded. When you look at those images, I just Googled hydrangeas. When you look at those pictures of them in real life, they are formed out. They aren't flat petals. So coloring this way with dark on both ends of the petal helps it to look more round and like the leaves are curling out away from the center. I did each one the same exact way, but I'm only going to show you one of each color because otherwise we'll be here a really long time, guys. Really long time. So I work out from my lightest to my darkest, my darkest back into my lightest, and this I just feels like gives me the best blend. But you do whatever works for you. I start with my lightest because if I start with my dark, I get really heavy-handed with my dark, and then I lose my highlight. So, but if it works for you to start with your dark, then do, like I said, whatever works for you. There is no right or wrong way to cope with color. There's just different techniques. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm moving on to the blue violets, and I'm coloring the exact same way that I did before. When I'm coloring, I try to make sure that the color I'm putting down, the strokes I'm laying down, are not super stiff, that they're really kind of organic, that they don't match up exactly, because in nature, those things don't. When you see a colored flower, the colors that are in it are not just flat wash of color. There is differences and little idiosyncrasies that make it an original, and you want the same thing. We're trying to reproduce the same thing. When you're coloring realistic, that's the goal, which is what I'm trying to do in this card. I don't know how well we're succeeding, but that is the attempt nonetheless. So most of these colors I worked with the blues, blue violets, violets, and red violets. And the reason that I chose those colors is because, again, I Googled those images, and hydrangeas in real life come in all of those colors. Every single one of them worked really well with that blue center. They all blended very nicely. If you were doing, because really these flowers can be whatever you want. They don't have to be hydrangeas. That's just how I chose to color them. Because I think they're pretty. I had hydrangeas in my wedding bouquet. But you can do them whatever you want. But if you're going to do something like a yellow or an orange, I'd skip the blue center because you're just going to end up with green in your flower. Unless you want green in your flower, then do that because that's what you'll get. For the purples, I tried to be fairly light-handed. A lot of times when I color violets, I tend to go a little heavy-handed with the darker purple. Violets are such an easy color to get a good contrast. Like their color families just really lend itself well to get a good contrast. And so I tend to be a bit more heavier with the darks. Here I tried to be a little bit lighter because of those photos, because of what they look like in real life. But again, it's your card. So whatever you think is pretty, just do that. And I guarantee you at the end, it'll be pretty. You'll be fine. So I colored all of those violet ones, and then we're going to move on to the red violet. Now, the lightest color I'm using is an R, which is a red. It's not a red violet. But when you look at this color, I'm telling you it's pink. Like, that color is pink. So don't feel like you're constricted to your color families when it comes to Copics. You can kind of mix and match and see what's going to work for you. I use the R81, an RV55, an RV63, and an RV66. The 63 and the 66 go together according to Copic, but the other ones totally don't. But they're all a pink that is more purple based versus more red based. So they still worked really nicely together, and I was happy with the blend that I got. So just kind of play around with what you have and see what colors are going to work together. Don't feel like you have to be just restricted to whatever Copic paired together, because you don't. They work nice. They work nice together. Here we're going to do the leaves. There were some spaces in between my flowers. I opted just to color those in green because I felt like that would kind of break up the flowers a little bit. If you didn't want to break them up, you could pick any one of those colors that we use for the flowers and color the in-between spots of that as well. It just depends on what kind of look you're going for. I wanted to kind of break them up a bit. Plus, I wasn't really happy with my leaf placement. It happens to the best of us. Like sometimes it is what it is. And so I was kind of trying to bring in more of that green to break up those 3 leaves. I put down my lightest color from the center out, and then the YG03, the same thing. Here with the G05, and again, I'm mixing color families. I'm concentrating just on the center and around where the flowers would lay. For my darkest color, I'm going around where the flowers lay on top of it, where my shadows would be the darkest. But then really I'm just drawing in veins into those leaves because I don't want them to be flat. I want them to look like real leaves. So then after that, I'm just going to go ahead and blend out all of those colors with the same colors that we've already been using. I personally tend to gravitate toward a yellow-green leaf. That's just a preference. But these would be pretty, with just straight greens or some of the darker yellow greens. Don't feel like you're constricted to just what I guess a natural color palette would be. You do you. It's a card. It's supposed to be fun. So I picked a blue that I felt matched that salty ocean fairly well, and I'm just outlining the whole image. So it's just going to help those colors pop. And then I have a real love affair with shadows. So I wanted my images to pop up off, even though it's a one-layer card. I don't want it to look like a one-layer card. I want it to look like it's 3D. So here I'm just going to go ahead and add in those shadows. I'm going right over the coloring that I already laid down because it's where the natural shadows would be. So don't feel like you're going to mess up your coloring. I prefer to do my shadows as if my light source was in the top right. So in the beginning you saw me lay my marker that way because my light source in my craft room is actually in the top right. I also forgot to mention that I did add some detail with my white gel pen to the centers, just a couple of little dots, just something to kind of add a little bit of extra. Blending out that shadow with a C3 and then a C1, and then I'm going to re-outline the whole thing. With the shadow, I want to caution you with that C1. If you go over your flowers and you're using brighter or darker colors, that C1 can pick up some of those darker colors and drag them. So you could end up, like it happens to me a lot with reds. So just be aware of that. We're going to move on to the sentiment, and I'm using that Painted Kindness. Simon Says Stamp released a bunch of really pretty words in this style. This is just one of them. And I'm combining that with one of their newer stamp sets from the Uplifting Thoughts. The actual stamp set says kindness can change the world, but I blanked out the kindness. So I want to do inlay die cutting, which basically just means you cut a piece out of your panel, cut a second piece, and then fit that second piece back where you cut out the first. The easiest way I find to do that is to put down just regular Scotch tape on the back of my panel, and then I can fit in the new word. Everything sticks where it's supposed to. The only thing that is kind of tricky about this is you have to save the middle pieces, like from the D and the E, anything that's cut out from the original, and fit them back in so that it completes the picture. Here's that sentiment I was talking about. I'm getting everything lined up so that it's straight because it says kindness can change the world, but I already have the word kindness. So in order to make this work, I'm going to be using a Post-it note to block off the kindness that's on the stamp. And then I'm going to be stamping in Simon Says Stamp black ink. This is one of my favorite inks for stamping sentiments. It's really crisp. So I'm going to remove that Post-it after I'm done inking and stamp that down to complete the sentiment. So it still says kindness can change the world, but the kindness is a die cut. So just kind of a different look to get. Those black sentiments are difficult to read on top of Copic coloring, especially with a solid black outline. So the way that I find I can make them kind of pop out is by tracing those words with a white gel pen. If you get a little overzealous and go over the black writing, no need to worry because you can just fix that with a a gel pen or a Copic multi-liner. I added some sequins to the centers that are just clear sequins, and now I'm going to go ahead and adhere this to my card base. At this point, I'm like, I'm done. Pretty card. Sequins on it. I got my shine. Then I needed more shine because there could never be too much shine. So I added some clear Wink of Stella to just like the tips of the petals. And then I still wasn't happy. There just was something that I was missing. I decided to go back in with the same Copic markers I did the shadows with on the flower and add a shadow to that kindness. I felt like because it was white, it was really getting lost in the outside edges of the card. So I'm just adding the shadow right to, or on the left side. Just be careful if you get any of the shadow colors on your kindness, since it's a bright white, you can just clean it up with the colorless blender, and it's like it never happened. So here is the completed card. I hope that it gives you some ideas for how to use your die cuts a little bit differently. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will catch you guys on the next video. Bye.